Really excellent article here on Aaron Maté's Substack. I'll link down below, debunking all of the lies and slander that were thrown his way by these two, let's say, insidious characters, Cenk Uygur and Kasparian of TYT. So let's get into it. And again, you've probably heard about this, but I mean, he's going to go point by point debunking all of the bullshit they threw his way. On a recent episode of The Young Turks, the self-described homo progressives, I mean, if there's nothing fucking progressive about The Young Turks at this point. Consume your news and analysis from actual progressive or leftist sources, anti-imperialist sources in particular, like Mint Press News, The Gray Zone. Redacted Tonight is really good, really funny as well. Again, there's a lot better sources out there than the fucking bullshit State Department talking points they put out at the TYT. Anyways, host Cenk Uygur and Kasparian disparaged me in a McCarthyite rant. The apparent trigger was a mocking comment that I had tweeted at Uygur, in which I described a recent post of his about Israel-Palestine as the worst tweet of all time. I'm standing by that, as he should. It was such a stupid fucking tweet. I mean, Jesus Christ. Israelis and Palestinians kill each other over which sky god they pretend to speak to, and it's politically incorrect to point out there's no human god, let alone one that favors Jews or Muslims. All this violence over the equivalent of which character they like better in the MCU. Is he being intentionally obtuse, or is he just like that fucking stupid? Sincere question. I think it might be the latter. I don't know. My God tells me this is the worst tweet of all time. Oh, fuck yeah. And then here's the exchange. And then I have a video like a week back from the actual exchange if you want to see it in video form. Cenk Uygur, they said Aaron Maté yelled at me. Anna Kasparian, Aaron Maté. Everyone cares what the Aaron Maté has to say, right? The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah, fuck Aaron Maté, Cenk. And gets paid by fuck you, and gets paid by the Russians. Anyway, let's move on. Let's end the frickin' I can't. See what happens? I can't stand that guy. I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to the disgusting dictators around the world. Very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you. Let's move on. Alright, we're done. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Aaron Maté feels very warm in his Russian blanket. He's like, but the Russian government favors me. You should be super proud of that. Way to go, Aaron. You did. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. All right, we'll just play it for posterity. I guess I probably should have played it instead of... Volume would help.
Aaron Maté lied. Aaron Maté.
They said Aaron Maté yelled at me. And
so Aaron Maté lied. Aaron Maté. Everyone cares what Aaron Maté has to say, right? The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks.
Just all fucking bullshit.
Yeah, fuck you. Anyway, let's move on. Let's end the freaking pod.
Jesus Christ, dude. These people are fucking unhinged.
I can't stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world. The very people they seem to be working for, to be quite...
And again, they're not citing any factual evidence. They're just making up lies and smearing an actual journalist with journalistic credibility. That being Aaron Maté. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, the home of progressives, am I right? Anyone who's watched the clip will see their behavior and tone speaks for itself, as we just did. As for the substance of the claims about me, all are lies. I've never been... let's see. I've never been paid by or worked for the Russian government, much less the Russians, who total 140 million. Kasparian's smear is a form of conjecture that I seem to be working for dictators, to be quite honest with you, is maliciously dishonest. Kasparian and Uygur were really, to be quite honest with you, with themselves, they come clean about my real crime, in their eyes, being a journalist who does my job. One of the tasks that entails is questioning official narratives put forth by the intelligence agencies and foreign policy wonks that keep the U.S. empire running. But yeah, the Young Turks, they're completely fine going along with U.S. State Department talking points, whether it be with the, this chemical weapons attack that has been debunked. There is no evidence that the Assad government perpetrated this, and instead of, let's maybe, the Young Turks I'm speaking for, let's maybe investigate, how or who these people were killed by. No, let's just continue to parrot the State Department talking points, even though this whole cover-up with the OPCW has been out there for quite some time, or fucking Russiagate. There's still fucking Cenk Uygur, and I'm assuming Anna Kasparian is also really into that fucking bullshit. And examining evidence on its merits regardless of partisan or careerist utility. Apparently TYT has made a policy to perform neither of these tasks, and far worse, to slander someone who does. Their screed went on air while I was on the ground in Syria. He was literally, goddamn, what? I don't know, just the juxtaposition here tells you everything to know about how much of bad faith actors Cenk and Anna are. Sitting there in their fucking air-conditioned studio. I think they're based in LA, right? While Aaron Maté is actually going on the ground in fucking Syria, talking to actual fucking Syrians who are being literally starved and strangled to death by U.S. fucking sanctions. Again, do not consume any of your news or analysis from TYT. If you're donating to them, find a better fucking source. They are absolute fucking trash. Committing wanton acts of actual journalism. Specifically, I was continuing my reporting on major cover-up the OPCW, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, involving a major atrocity, I alluded to this earlier, in the city of Duma. I was also there to see firsthand the effects of years of dirty war and the brutal U.S. sanctions still... I like you use strangling, I use that as well. Strangling that country's, because it's correct, economy and citizenry. This was the context in which Kasparian described me as someone who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical weapons attacks. They're on the fucking ground May 25th while they're paired the State Department talking points and just fucking smearing them. That's absolutely disgusting. Let's briefly review the facts to see who's denying what. In April 2018, the US, UK, and France bombed Syria after accusing the government of committing a chemical attack in Duma that same month. But OPCW inspectors who visited the scene days later found no evidence of a chemical weapons attack in Duma. A trove of leaked documents include the team's suppressed initial report, and then they doctored a later one, showed that their findings were doctored and kept from the public. After the censorship was protested internally, a group of U.S. officials visited The Hague, I believe that's where the International Criminal Court is, right? In a highly irregular move, tried to convince the team that the chlorine gas was used. The inspectors were then removed from the case and replaced by a group, with few exceptions, never set foot in Syria. The OPCW's final report, released in March 2019, aligned with the U.S. narrative and claiming that a chlorine attack likely occurred, distorting or outright omitting the countervailing evidence gathered by the original inspectors. And again, they're literally parroting, they're fucking holding water for fucking Donald Trump committing this fucking war crime in Syria. That's who they're doing the fucking bidding for, right? I mean, Jesus Christ. Home of progressives, am I right? To Kasparian, my choosing to report on the scandal, including a trip to Duma to see it up close, apparently amounts to an act of denial. The opposite is true, worse than the opposite, in fact. The prevailing refusal by U.S. media outlets to cover the OPCW story is one of the most egregious cases of willful blindness and journalistic self-censorship since the lead-up to the Iraq War. They're not only running cover for the warmongering of the Trump admin, precisely, they claim to loathe, but also abandoning the brave OPCW whistleblowers who challenged the cover-up at great personal risk. Worse, they are denying justice to the Duma victims whose actual cause of death remains unknown. Again, they're not even fucking concerned with that. They're just parodying this U.S. State Department and holding water for the fucking Trump administration's war crimes. I mean, Jesus Christ, home of progressives. I have no training in psychology, but one doesn't need it to detect a high degree of projection behind Uygur and Kasparian's fabrication. A quick look at TYT's journalistic output and who finances it is instructive. While falsely suggesting that it worked for disgusting dictators, yes, her infamous interview with Madeleine Albright, who is totally fine with 500,000 Iraqi children dying because of U.S. sanctions. Kasparian's resume includes a promotional gig at the Munich Security Conference, an annual gathering sponsored by NATO governments and the weapons manufacturers that profit off their perpetual warmongering. Kasparian, in own defense, has claimed that she merely covered a conference, but her coverage consists of entirely cheery PR videos on topics such as the role of NATO in attempting to keep peace internationally. The NATO peace zone of post-2011 Libya did not garner a mention in the 18-minute segment, where they literally have fucking slavery in that country again, thanks to this U.S.-led fucking intervention, this war. Kasparian also conducted a friendly sit-down with Madeleine Albright, the former U.S. Secretary of State. Somehow Kasparian's self-proclaimed disgust with those who launder the killing of children didn't impel her to even raise Albright's infamous declaration that killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children was, in her view, worth it. In fact, Kasparian went on to declare that she was delighted and sought an honor to interview the admitted child murderer. It's quite telling, isn't it? As for Uygur, Cenk Uygur, right? Yeah. His through-the-teeth lie that I'm paid by the Russians are even more risible given his own funding sources. In 2017, DNC megadonor and Hollywood mogul Jeffrey Katzenberg led a round of investments in TYT worth $20 million. Thus, after this purportedly progressive outlet took boatloads of money from the neoliberal Dem Party elite, it is now also parodying their favorite McCarthyite smear tactic. Dissenters and political foes must be paid by the Russians. I have my guesses as to where Uygur is coming from. Inwardly uncomfortable with the awkward positions he put himself in, maintaining his image as a Bernie Sanders progressive while wrapping himself in the DNC cozy quote, he has to place the shame somewhere. A journalist that eschews an establishment security blanket and thus has the liberty to stay true to his principles as good a target as any. So, being Maté. TYT's meltdown, immature though it wasn't just the case of two individuals going off hinge to slander a perceived foe. Uygur and Kasparian rank McCarthyism fall squarely in the line with chauvinist, militaristic, Russiagate-driven worldview that has virally laid waste to intellects throughout left liberal media in recent years. Driving this ideological plague has been an elaborate propaganda campaign at Western audiences with the specific goal of demonizing the two states invoked in the TYT rant. Russia and Syria. I don't know if he gets into this article, but he was on Jimmy Dore talking about the same issue, actually. And the whole reason that Russia got involved in this war was to stop ISIS, al-Nusra, those other fucking fanatical jihadist groups from overtaking the capital, from overtaking the whole of Syria. So that's why they got in, and the U.S. was willing to let that happen in order to institute regime change, in order to institute the Assad regime going away. They were okay with that, and so Russia got involved to stop that from fucking happening. Following the same playbook used for Iraq, Libya, and any other target of U.S. hegemony, this campaign reduces entire states and their populations to a cartoonish portrayal of their leaders while justifying antipathy or outright aggression against them with cynical appeals to human rights and democracy. What sets the Russia and Syria cases apart is the extent to which this disinformation effort has succeeded in winning over the progressive wing of its target. Not fucking me, I haven't never fucking for this bullshit. But then again, I like to use critical thinking skills. And I don't just digest State Department talking points without filtering them through my fucking bullshit meter, okay? In the case of Syria, the dominant narrative sold to the world, a genocidal dictator crushing a peaceful nation uprising, was so persuasive that I was once swayed by elements of it. In reality, as anyone can see by looking into the facts, all you need to do, Syria has been since 2011 subjected to one of the most expensive, destructive, and murderous dirty wars in history. And the sanctions that are on the country now, the sanctions that the Biden administration has continued to place on Syria, have fucking crippled their reconstruction efforts. And the U.S. still more or less controls a third of the fucking country. You don't see TYT talking about that. They're conveniently omitting all of this fucking information while they fucking smear Aaron Maté. The dirty war in Syria has nothing to do with the Syrian protesters who rallied for democratic and anti-corruption reforms under authoritarian government at the outset of the Arab Spring. Those demonstrations were co-opted and exploited by outside powers, U.S., Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and the U.K. and Israel, who simultaneously launched a criminal-like pre-planned war aimed at collapsing a disobedient, resistant Axis state. Facts are now readily available to anyone willing to absorb them from the most mainstream of sources and the admissions, public and private, of the principles involved. As the official story goes, weapons funneled by the U.S. to Syria under the CIA's Timber Sycamore program were supposedly intended for vetted so-called and they ended up fucking going to like these Al-Qaeda groups, fighting to bring freedom and democracy to Syria. No one has debunked this myth more succinctly than current Oval Office occupant. In a characteristically off-script remark to a Harvard audience in 2014, Joe Biden acknowledged that there was no moderate middle in Syria. Instead, Biden said U.S. allies in Syria had poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons at anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. It's fucking Biden saying this. This, Biden explained, is why our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. Alright, shall we take a listen?
Our biggest problem is our allies. What my constant cry was,
it's not very loud.
Our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends.
Hope you can hear that.
Which I just spent a lot of time with, the Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were
not pick him into bed there. There's a little dry skin.
And the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq,
coming over there, right?
Essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory.
Thanks to the fucking U.S. Alright, that's enough of that, but there you go, Biden his own fucking words. Biden has soon apologized for offending his Gulf and Turkish allies, but his only error, aside from failing to name-check Qatar, was admitting the fact that the U.S. was their willing partner, continuing a working relationship prior dirty wars in Nicaragua and Afghanistan. Syrian government, backed by Russia, Iran, and the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah, is ultimately able to defeat the U.S.-backed sectarian Contras and regain control of about 70% of the country, but the damage was incalculable. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced, industrial and agricultural capacity decimated. State that once enjoyed some of the highest... They had fucking universal health care. Think about that. Universal fucking health care in Syria. You have that in the fucking United States. Some of the highest medical, educational, and food production levels in the Middle East was divided, hungry, and impoverished, thanks to the fucking U.S. government, largely, and their so-called allies. Since their military defeat, the U.S. and its allies have imposed another of their intervention pet policy, strangling the Syrian population with economic warfare. As Syria now faces a famine and tries to rebuild, the U.S. military is occupying 1/3 of Syria, particularly, I believe, the oil deposit rich parts of the country, depriving of access to resource-rich region containing vital oil reserves and wheat, fucking food, kind of important. U.S. officials openly boast. In the summer of 2020, the Trump admin imposed a new round of crippling sanctions under the bipartisan Caesar. Think about that. Bipartisan. These sanctions explicitly target reconstruction, have, in the proud words of Trump envoy James Jeffrey, crushed the country. Literally, more fucking war crimes. That is a form of war crime. These sanctions are fucking war crimes. And they are designed to make the conditions on the ground so horrible that the people, this is the U.S. government's thinking, U.S. empire's thinking, the people would rise up against the Assad regime. I mean, just how sick and sadistic is that? Collectively punishing a whole population in hopes they will overturn this government that the U.S. doesn't. I mean, that is fucking just, it's so sick. U.S. taxpayer dollars hard at work. Rather than challenge their own government's decade-long military and ongoing economic terror campaign in Syria, a coterie of Western academics, media personalities, and journalists have emerged to champion it and to dismiss any heretics as dictator-loving Assadists. In the name of defending the Syrian revolution, these voices promote Western chauvinism and whitewashing its catastrophic consequences for the Syrian people. The claim of democracy promotion is cruelly absurd. No Syrian voted for the NATO states and Gulf atrocities who, acting as a global dictatorship, arrogate to themselves the right to decimate a foreign country by funding, arming, and training a vast army of jihadist proxy militias. To obscure this reality, leftist Western apologists for the Syrian dirty war have gone to great lengths to erase the critical U.S. role, scolding what he called the anti-imperialist of fools. The London-based academic Gilbert Achar recently declared in The Nation that Washington kept a low profile in the Syrian war. In Achar's rendering, the U.S. began stepping up its involvement only after so-called Islamic State surged and crossed the border into Iraq, after which it began restricting its direct intervention to the fight against ISIS. Oh my. Jesus. Yeah. Here we go. I was mentioned this earlier. It is also true that U.S. deliberately leveraged ISIS advance for its regime change goals. This was privately conceded in 2016 by then Secretary of State John Kerry, who told a group of Syrian opposition activists that the U.S. sat on its heels as Daesh, ISIS, was growing in strength and even threatening the possibility of going to Damascus, the Syrian capital. We were watching, Kerry explained. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. U.S. indifference to the threat of ISIS takeover, Kerry added, is why Russia went in, as I talked about earlier, to Syria in 2015, because they didn't want a fucking ISIS government. I mean, Jesus Christ. And this is who TYT is fucking defending. The home of progressives. Jesus Christ. Let's see. Yeah. Among the campaign's successes, the fact that now, with the U.S. squeezing the Syrian people with the world's harshest sanctions, after all the fucking brutality we've already fucking left the country and the people with, there's no major organized U.S. campaign to stop it, nor even any major progressive outlet willing to cover it. Democracy Now!, which so heroically covered the devastating U.S. sanctions on Iraq in the 1990s, has been as silent on the U.S. sanctions on Syria as it has on the OPCW scandal. And that's fucking disgusting. Shame on you, fucking Democracy Now! The same with The Intercept, which has yet to acknowledge the OPCW whistleblower's existence and last covered the Caesar sanctions while mocking its critics in Code Pink more than 2 years ago when they're first produced. Yeah, fucking Intercept's trash too, in my opinion. Yeah, pure cruelty. Ronnie Kalik's completely correct. Let's see. As for late scholar Stephen F. Cohen, he was awesome. Tirelessly documented the reasons for Western hostility toward Putin, all traced back to his insubordination of the U.S.-led hegemony, curbing U.S. ownership in Russia's oil industry, rebuking U.S. militarism, and the 27 Munich conference, to the outrage of front row audience member John McCain. Yeah, fucking rotten hell. Easily defeating Georgia in a 2018 military conflict and humiliating neoconservatives like McCain, who had egged it on. Resisting the U.S.-backed maiden coup and seizing Crimea, thereby weakening neocon designs for a NATO state on Russia's borders, and just as egregiously intervening in Syria on the side of the government to help defeat U.S.-backed Wahhabi death squads because, as John Kerry made it privately, Russia didn't want an ISIS government. This background set the stage for the demonization of Russia that went into overdrive in 2016 was when Russia allegedly waged a sweeping and systematic influence campaign to install Trump in the White House. The motives for Russiagate are by now easily discernible. Blaming Russia in a fictional collusion plot, recused Democrat neoliberal... Again, Russia didn't cause Trump to win. Trump won because Hillary was such a fucking horrible and disliked candidate. Thus, they evaded any disruption to their cherished power and privilege within the same dysfunctional political system that made his improbable impossible. All right. Jesus. And then, yeah, look at fucking Democracy Now! Parodying that shit. Result was a disaster for the left. Russiagate massively expanded the liberal embrace of the CIA and the U.S. security state. Not a good look. Under the guise of resisting Trump, intelligence officials were heralded as heroes, and their imperial worldview elevated as sacrosanct. Nation's major progressive outlets, Intercept, Democracy Now!, Mother Jones, TYT, covered themselves in ingloriousness by parodying the evidence for claims of U.S. intelligence officials and chasing the plot twist peddled by unhinged Trump Russia conspiracy theorists down their myriad rabbit holes. I mean, there's the receipt. Yeah. Protect me. Look at that. Jesus Christ. Yeah. On a personal note, it's frustrating to see longtime colleagues and friends fall either silent or even get duped by Russiagate disinfo campaign. On the other hand, I was more than happy, honored, in fact, to be one of the handful willing to challenge such a transparently moronic and dangerous. I mean, yes, do not need to be creating more tensions between the U.S. and any other country, especially a nuclear-armed country like Russia or China, for that matter. Can't even muster a grim sense of smugness when it comes to Syria, though. Having just returned from a brief trip there, the relentless propaganda only compounds my outrage. Visiting Damascus and surrounding towns, I was able to glimpse firsthand the destruction and sadism that's been unleashed on this beautiful ancient country and its besieged civilian pop, including the odious and ongoing sanctions regime. I'll have more to say on Syria in this space soon. The damage to Syria from U.S.-backed dirty wars is incalculable, making its continued whitewashing in the columnists, I'm not sure what that means, spewed at those who dare call it out, all the more despicable. The fact that self-described progressive outlets can still cling to Syria Russiagate propaganda that was not only destructive but explicitly used to undermine causes that they claim to champion also speaks to the power of the U.S. propaganda system and the malleability of opportunistic media personalities seeking to advance within its confines. In this context, while the hostility of Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian toward a dissenting journalist may be unpleasant to watch, it is very easy to understand. Wow. Excellent piece. I'll link down below in case you want to read some of the parts I glossed over. But again, boycott, divest, sanction, TYT. Don't support them. Actual support real journalists like Aaron Maté, because TYT is fucking garbage. They have been for quite some time, in my opinion. Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. All part of the people. Peace. Much love.